All right. Hey, and welcome everyone. We went live 5 seconds ago, so this is great. I'm in the right timing with my announcement. Hey everyone, welcome to a new Semrush webinar. Today we have the second webinar in a series called Marketers versus Engineers. And basically this is an opportunity to compare two worldviews, two perspectives, two ways to think about things, two ways to think about marketing, two ways to think about SEO, and then basically draw a conclusion from that. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? And what can you learn for your life as a business owner or marketer or someone who is working in the space of SEO? And as we kick this off, please feel free to say hello in the comments. Let us know where you're from. I see here already Linda coming in from Canada, Scott coming in from Atlanta. So please let us know where you're from, and we will kick this off right away. Today's episode is about technical SEO versus content optimization. I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion to be had. Both of them are super popular topics. And I have three panelists, guests here with me today, and I'll quickly introduce them, and then we will have Jono give a presentation to basically up your knowledge, get us all on the same page, raise some very important questions, and then we'll debate. So as we start discussing, please feel free to add comments into the chat. So we're going to read them out. We're going to answer your questions. And at the last webinar, we've really had good success with your comments and answering the questions. And I think it was a lot of fun for everyone. So there we go. The guy that's going to get us started is Jono Elderson. Jono is a digital strategist, marketing technologist, and full-stack developer with 2 decades of experience in web development, SEO, analytics, brand and campaign strategy, lead gen, CRO, and much more. There you go. I read this well.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. Very kind.
What we're trying to say, he's one of the good ones and definitely a creative mind in the space. And he's worked with startup, agency, and some of the world's biggest brands to fix websites and implement growth strategies. All right. Then we have Red on the panel here with us. And he's been working in the digital marketing industry for a decade, also comes from web development and software engineering. So I guess you guys can already guess who are the 2 engineers in today's discussion. Red is basically a specialist in technical SEO with a deep understanding of algorithm and software architecture that give him a huge advantage. He works for Suso Digital, a boutique SEO agency in London. And then thirdly, we have Rebecca here with us, who's been exploring digital marketing for the last 5.5 years. She turned from content writer into SEO, dabbled with PPC a little bit, and now is using all the knowledge she's learned over the last few years to create a great user-centric content. All right. And actually, Rebecca also told us that in her spare time, she likes drinking coffee and watching Gilmore Girls, which is perfect because that's exactly the stuff that I like doing as well. My name is Viola, and I'm here kind of like as a host, but I also consider myself very much on the marketing and content side of things. So we have a nice 2x2 panel here today. So I think we're good in time. Everyone is on. So Jono, I'll hand over to you to set the stage for this discussion about technical SEO versus content optimization.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's share my screen and see if this works. See if the powers that be will make that happen. Yes, excellent. You know what? I've just noticed that in my very engineer-focused way of trying to get a quick and easy stock photo to stop me having to think creatively, there's a massive fly on that car, which completely ruins the image. Like as a marketer and a content person, I might have paid more attention to that detail and not fallen into that trap. Oh well. Right, let's do the thing. So thank you very much for the intro. Let's talk about engineers versus marketers and who's going to win. This is a radically oversimplified view of what SEO looks like, maybe used to look like. It's obviously a lot more complicated and a lot more sophisticated, especially nowadays, but it's a reasonable mental model for a starting place. In order to succeed, you need some degree of technical SEO, a solid foundation, some degree of content optimization, the ability to tell your message to the world and get that right, and some degree of evidence that you are an authority and relevant, which typically comes in the form of links. Because links are the least interesting bit of this conversation, and there is far too much talk of and focus on links in the industry. We're going to completely disregard that area and look at the two remaining interesting areas. What is your platform and how is it built and how does it work? And what are you putting on it to convince users that you are a good fit? This is technical SEO versus content optimization. Woo. Or maybe more accurately, technical SEO versus content optimization. Maybe the other way around, and we can certainly make an argument in some cases that content might be more important. Let's do a bit of a dig. The question we need to answer is, which side should you pick? How should you prioritize? How do you know? And what happens tomorrow and in the future? Assuming that everyone has finite resources or time or energy and money, where should you invest and what does that look like? I don't think there are any easy answers to this question. And if there were, it would certainly vary wildly by organization, website, person, country, context. But this is the kind of question which we should always be asking as people who are interested in SEOs. What should I focus on now and in the future to get the most impact and the best results? So to try and answer this question of which side should win, we're going to need to ask some more questions. And I'm going to lay the foundations for the discussions that we're going to have with the panel and hopefully give us a starting point to start asking some of those tricky areas. So the first thing I want to look at is, what is each side of this debate trying to achieve? And I think that's pretty easy to answer. Both sides want to achieve the same thing. In principle, we're aligned in our vision. We have the same goals. We want to know how we win at SEO. And again, this will vary by business. In some cases, that will mean rankings. In some, it will mean conversions. But we're broadly trying to do the same stuff. Now, to achieve that, we have different approaches. The technical side will focus on, let's build a perfect platform so that users and search engines have the best possible quality of experience. Because we know that all the science says that errors and slow pages and missing standards can impact things like discoverability, crawling, indexing, and more broadly user experience and onto conversion rate. Now, the content side says we need to develop perfect messaging so that we can convince our users and search engines that our products and services are a perfect fit for a particular type of user with a particular type of query or problem. Because the science tells us that generic content and thin pages or mismatches in user intent versus content can impact discoverability and onto user experience and conversion. Two different approaches and mentalities to try and solve the same kind of problems. You see, I'm cheating a bit because I don't think this is really a versus challenge. It's not tech versus content. It's about the relationship between the two. It's about how do we get these to work together and what's this bit in the middle look like? There is some overlap. These things don't and can't exist independently. You can't have a website without any content, not in a way that would make sense. And if you have content, it has to live somewhere. Now, Google says just produce great content, but that quietly implies on a fast website with no errors, on a great design which works on mobile with rich meta information and structured data and an up-to-date server. Let's say that because it's a bit of a mouthful, but you get the idea. These things are connected. What we both want to do, and this is my attempt at really trying to define quite precisely what modern SEO might look like, is to provide the best resource for a specific audience for their specific problems. And I think the wording here is quite intentional and interesting because best resource isn't a technically perfect page with thin content. It's not a perfectly crafted page of information on a page which looks awful or takes ages to load. And it's not perfect content on a perfect platform which targets the wrong people with the wrong messaging for the wrong keywords in the wrong country. So I think we need to start understanding what are the boundaries between these disciplines. Because as individuals, as businesses, we have finite time and focus and resources, and it's impractical to say, be perfect at everything, fix all the things. I mean, that's really easy to say, but obviously the reality is harder. So improving your website, your content, your marketing, your technology, and the choices you make on your focus there all come at opportunity costs, whether that's time, money, energy, or not spending time and money in other areas of your business. So we do need to carve this up a little bit and think about where we should be investing. This visual monstrosity is a slide that I've stolen unashamedly from a talk I gave at MozCon in 2018, which was trying to paint a little bit of what I think SEO might be turning into. And it starts to give you this idea that maybe technical SEO isn't just one thing. It's a lot of little areas like speed and security and how your servers are set up and the quality of your HTML and what type of JavaScript you use and how your sitemaps behave, what happens when there's an error, how all of your tags interoperate, and 100 other things. But also content is more than just the blocks of words you put on a page. It's tied deeply into design and user experience design and accessibility and PR. And not only that, but it lives in multiple formats and increasingly in places other than just on your website as we look at co-publishing into other platforms. And it touches on brand and product and customer service and many other areas of a business. It's not as simple as nip around the edge and write some words in this kind of isolated area where content lives. And it's not as simple as find an exposed bit of technical SEO where we can make some tweaks. The good stuff where we really make an impact on user experience and conversion rate and revenue and success is this meaty center, this intersect of all the things which are technical and content. This is where the most impactful SEO happens. So at least part of answering this question about what should we be doing and prioritizing is about prioritizing. That was odd. Prioritizing is about understanding how we make changes in this middle area rather than just having two disciplines nibbling around the edge ineffectually. I think part of the answer to that is thinking about not only these two things as disciplines, but where they live in an organization. And I suspect we don't have time to get into this, but in depth in the conversation we're going to have, but it's worth considering that maybe we've already made a mistake by considering these to be two different disciplines and two different teams, two sets of people. I know that one of the things you might do to start to address this overlap is reevaluate how you structure these teams or your whole business, moving away from a conventional hierarchy to something more like a holacracy. Teams of multidisciplinary people working in focus and project groups, tasked with areas like improve growth or manage retention, rather than saying work on the content, improve the technical platform. That makes it much easier to ask and answer these difficult questions like, how do we help users who are researching in our product space, rather than which technical things should we fix this week, or what articles should the content team write for which keywords? I know anecdotally, the businesses who are winning at answering this question of what is the relationship between technical and content marketing are the people who structure their teams in this way, who unify them and give them a shared goal and help them to attack that. Now, I've talked a little about where SEO was and some oversimplified models. I think if we're going to answer this question, we also need to be looking forward, which is my favorite thing to do, because I think there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in this space, and no doubt we'll get sucked into discussing some of it. It's also worth considering that to a degree, none of these questions and challenges really just apply to digital marketing. I think it's worth thinking that businesses have always had to do both of these things in whatever environment. They've had to establish a credible platform, whether it's an e-commerce store or a physical branch on a high street, attract an audience to it, and then convince those people to engage. Now, in the brick and mortar world, say with a clothing store, that might mean making an appealing brand, maintaining an attractive storefront, optimizing your layout and shopping experience, and refining your sales messaging. That's not radically different from the stuff we're talking about doing online. What's happening, though, is some streamlining of those processes and some additional complexity which we inherit from being digital. I think one of those that's worth looking at is the increasing baseline quality of website technology. It is no longer 1998. Websites are no longer built in Flash and Cold Fusion and ActionScript. We are making fewer mistakes. I say that as a technical SEO who is continuously furious about how many websites and developers make basic mistakes with things like meta tags and canonicals. But that aside, in the broader space, we're rarely building things from scratch. We're building on the work of others and foundations. We're using more open source solutions. We're collectively improving the web. The technology is evolving and getting easier to use. The standards are evolving. The documentation is better. There's more education. These ecologies are evolving. Now, content management systems like WordPress, yay! And plugins like Yoast, yay! And other tools also handle a lot of the technical requirements quietly in the background and increasingly just get it right, which means that businesses and users can focus more on their marketing rather than their technology. On the other side, I think that the quality of publishing tools is increasing as well. The platforms and tool providers who help facilitate getting words onto pages are understanding more about what it means to really market to an audience. And tools like Yoast, yay, I'm so promotional today, provide guidance and frameworks which help businesses to optimize their content, e.g. accounting for the differences in how content is read on the web versus in print, and how search engines enforce this one page to one topic ideology, which isn't necessarily how you might naturally write if you were trying to convince a customer in a different environment. I think both of those are allowing us to put more focus on the quality of the thing itself. Now, in the real world, as consumers, we were just talking, we have to evaluate the marketing messaging of each brand which is vying for our attention and choose which ones we trust. What's happening online is that Google is increasingly acting as our agent and is filtering out brands and products which we shouldn't trust for our problems. And they do that in part based on the technical and content quality of our websites. Now, this is great for users. It means that you never see things which are a bad fit, but it can be a double-edged brand for swords. If you're an incredible baker, it feels like a dysfunction that you also have to maintain a perfect website and craft compelling content. You're a baker, not a writer or a coder, and any time spent in those areas is time spent not baking. These improvements in all areas of web tech and digital marketing mean that you can focus more on what you're good at, and search engines are getting better at understanding and rewarding that. Conversely, if you're a brand whose product or service or prices or reputation aren't that great, it's going to make things harder. It's going to mean that you have to produce even better content and keep your tech in even better condition to stay in the playing field. I think the other thing that's worth thinking about is the growth of structured data as a primary communication medium. What do I mean? If you've watched any of the other recent Semrush webinars, you will no doubt have heard lots about schema and structured data, maybe from me and some other people. The short version is the way in which we communicate about our content and our quality and our relevance to Google increasingly involves not only the content and the words on our pages, but also the metadata in our code, the way we describe our organizations and our pages and our products and their prices and their availability and all the nuanced information of that. That's content, but in a technical format. And if your content strategy and optimization isn't considering the role of schema and structured markup, something which for a long time was purely technical consideration, it's going to get harder and harder to get your content in front of an audience in the search engines. This is the way that we will be communicating with Google. What is happening next? That's where we are. A few things to toss, some curveballs before we get into a discussion. I said 15 minutes, I'm at 13, this is great. We would be remiss if we didn't open the can of worms that is automatically generated content and machine learning and AI and all the buzzwords around that. Now, what's really interesting in this space is that for a long time, for many years, Google said explicitly that using automatically generated content could lead to forms of penalization. Machine learned content is the devil. That's mostly because the quality at the time was poor, and it typically went hand in hand with abuses of scale. I'm going to automatically generate 1 million low-quality pages for $5. We were talking about this before the webinar. This is a reality that exists in the world. Many people try to use this as a strategy. Now, what's interesting is that a few years ago, I forget the exact date, Google removed that documentation because high-quality machine-generated content is becoming more common. And in some cases, it's better or produced faster or more in-depth or more accurate than a human author might be able to produce given the same time and budget. Isn't that interesting? The idea that a machine could write a better piece of marketing collateral and web page than a human could given equivalent resources. And in the last few weeks, we've seen some radical things from OpenAI's GPT-3, a new machine learning piece of software and piece of as close to AI as we have achieved as a human race in the public space. It's capable of creating what I'll call real-looking content with only tiny amounts of guidance. Guidance like a keyword or a short phrase, for example. It's enough to feed it your choice of keyword and maybe some content from your site, and it will spin up and create realistic-looking content that may have small technical inaccuracies or quality challenges, but it will look and feel close. And we know that this works, especially in the SEO space. There's a site called notrealnews.net, which is a proof of concept running on GPT-2, which is the worst predecessor of GPT-3, which gets millions of organic visitors per month from search engines, where the content is nonsense, but compellingly realistic. So none of this is new, but we've reached a tipping point where we really ought to be considering the role of technically generated content and what that means for this discussion. I think we're also potentially on a road to a place where websites just work. I know there's a huge amount of my time in WordPress land is spent on saying, how do we fix all of the potential flaws that people encounter and bugs that people encounter in websites and also prevent them from happening in the first place? And I know that, for example, most JavaScript frameworks are a headache from an SEO perspective, but some of them are really changing what technical SEO means. I'll call out AMP in particular. If you're not familiar with it, it's a framework of HTML and JavaScript, which was originally created by Google as an attempt to fix the mobile web by providing constraints and guidelines which make it really hard to build slow or broken things. And there are others as well. Nuxt and Next do really good, but they make it really hard to make technical SEO mistakes. As these frameworks start to become the norm and sites no longer break, what does that mean for technical SEO? I think the future of our reality looks something more like this. On the surface, it looks similar to the previous image, but it's split out in a subtly different way. It's still messy, but we've removed some of the generic labels and split them out. What stands out is the importance of structured content, this space where content marketing and the way we describe it technically with structured data and schema overlaps, where content is well written and well targeted, but technically optimized too. Things like recipes, which might use rich structured markup to describe the individual steps and the reputation of the author and the availability of the book it's published in and the opening times of the restaurants where it's cooked and the relationship between all of these things. There's an overlap between these worlds where I think very few people are playing, but it's where the opportunities are at. Very quickly, I think it might be worth considering if we should change the terminology. If content marketing can be machine generated and technical SEO can be fixed, maybe we need to look a level above those at the true problems we're trying to solve. I think that it's not technical SEO and content optimization. I think we're talking about quality and about marketing. If technical SEO also covers areas like speed and accessibility and security and 100 other things, it makes more sense to think about it as quality. It's still abstract, but maybe it's a better framework. If content optimization is about getting the right message in the right format to the right user to solve their problem, that goes so far beyond creating a keyword target optimized article or shoehorning 200 words into the bottom of a category page. We're talking about how you make your pages convincing and compelling. That's marketing. It's not content marketing. There's still two different types of thing, but I think framing it this way might make that conversation easier for stakeholders and as we start to mature as an industry. Very lastly, because I'm 18 minutes, not 15, I think there is still some space for conflict in this, which we need to resolve. This is all nice in theory, but in reality, we are all limited by the roles we're in to a degree. We operate in silos. Businesses are structured certain ways and typically are rooted in yesterday's operational models. We need to address those real world constraints. I think there are interesting questions around things like, where does budget come from? If we're going to say both of these teams need to work together in new and exciting ways, how is that funded? How is it tested? How is it guaranteed to be more effective and more efficient? How do you stop all of this breaking? If we're talking about increasing complexity in the overlap between these disciplines, which are already challenging, how do we stop that from being too hard? Who owns quality? It's ephemeral and abstract. It's not really a thing. Which team are responsible? Whose job is to make sure quality is achieved? How do you measure that? And if all of this is increasingly not things that you can just scale and throw money at to solve, how does that change the role of external resources like agencies versus in-house teams? If you currently get your content by paying a third party or get a third party to fix your site, as the resourcing requirements of those things change, that might affect all sorts of structures. And how do you determine not how am I doing? How are you doing? How are we doing? There are questions around how you measure this and which tools you should use, where you should definitely not be focusing, where we should individually be focusing our professional development if these industries are changing, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Let's explore.
I love it. And this actually fits perfect. The last comment just said, liked it. Jono is a monster. Nice one. And I think we can agree that you indeed opened a can of worms for us and so many things that I want to discuss. And what I would like to ask the audience first, can you pop in the comments, if you're a content writer, how often do you talk to the website devs? If you're, responsible for the website development, how often do you talk to the content team? I'd be super curious to see how your team functions in that way. And then secondly, more importantly, when you mentioned the fly, this is why I'm so irritated by this. I feel like people are looking, this is, the fly on your cover. This is me here in the electricity socket in the background. This is why I'm so irritated. So yeah, please let us know in the comment how often you talk between the content team and the dev team. I'd be super curious. And then basically, I want to ask a question to the three of you, and I'm probably going to go first so we can get to know them a little bit. But do we think that the question technical versus content maybe depends on the website size and age? Like, is this more maybe not a battle of the two, but a natural progression? And what are your thoughts on this?
I think definitely in terms of age, it's a question of there's a different amount of jobs that need to be done. So with the age, you're going to have outdated content that needs fixing. You're going to have loads of bugs that need fixing. There's going to have to be a lot more effort put into it. Whereas with the newer sites, I think there's a lot more experimentation that's going on. So I don't think it's sort of one over the other. I think it's just different outlets.
Yeah.
I actually quite agree with that. What I was going to say is, when you have an older website, I'd assume that at some point or the other, it's already had some technical SEO done to it, right? It's almost impossible that you have like 3, 4, 5 years old website and no one's ever looked at it. No one's ever done an SEO audit for it. So I'd assume that, some of the technical issues have already been, taken care of. And therefore, more stuff would probably need to be done in terms of the content. Like you said, Rebecca, there will be like a lot of outdated stuff, things that might no longer be accurate in currently, depending on the niche and stuff like that. But also, on the contrary, having said that, if someone did SEO like 5 years ago and was focusing mainly on like on-page SEO in terms of like technical stuff, I wouldn't think there's a lot that changed in general. And if it's an older website, most likely it will have more, let's call them hidden or buried issues than the new ones. Like you said, Jono, in your presentation, technology is getting better and you're getting, stuff that is better out of the box. So obviously, with the newer website, I'd hope that there will be less issues in terms of the technical stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. Some people said in the comment, I see neglected websites all the time. And I think my experience it sits kind of like along the lines of what you guys just said. I often attract a lot of kind of like startups and new companies. And then I always tell them, get a Shopify, get a WordPress, get a Wix, I don't know, make it easy on you, get the website going and just pump out content. Like if someone starts from nothing, I'm always like very much like produce content. And then sometimes, I have the obscure beast, especially if it's like websites with like thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of websites, when we're mainly doing like the stuff that you do, Red, like the indexing, crawling, fixing weird faceted navigation, etc. So in my mind, I always thought it's a progression. It's like, first content, then later more technical. But maybe that's also not the truth, because it really depends on the size of the website and where you're at any given stage. I'm actually quite glad to see. I see someone here in the comments said he talks between devs and content as often as possible for perfect sync, which I think is really appreciate. And I think that makes total sense.
Yeah. Just going back to your question, because you also mentioned the size of the website. And what I think, so with that, I would say that the bigger the site, the technical SEO actually becomes easier, because you can basically tackle all these things at scale, right? So if you find, I don't know, some indexing issues or tags that you want to, get rid of, you just block them out, use Yoast or something else on a different platform, and no index, all of the stuff basically with just one tick of the box, right? And this is amazing with these tools like Yoast that allow you to do that, right? Very promotional.
Thank you. He's not wrong.
So with the content, let me ask you guys this question: how wrong can you go with the content if you're actually, writing the content, even if you have, like, let's say, not very experienced in terms of the SEO content writers, but content writers that can write and, can research and then can create like decent quality content? I mean, my opinion is, obviously, I'm curious to know your opinions, but my opinion is you can't really go that wrong, right? On the contrary, if you have a developer who's just starting, in the business building websites, and if you ask them to build a website, you'll basically end up swearing a lot while you're doing SEO on that website.
I think it's a lot harder to convince the people that are buying into it why certain things need to be done a certain way for content. With technical, you can pretty much say, here's the tool that showed this, and this is what needs to be fixed, and it will do X, Y, and Z. But with content, if you just look for search terms that have the high search volume and don't look at what's generating on the SERPs for that, or you're not thinking about the brand or the tone of voice or even your audience, it can be, I think it is easy to get it wrong, but it's more difficult to explain that to someone, I think, than it would be to explain a technical fix.
I agree completely, and it's so often, sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, someone also said in the comments, like copying content, duplicate content, plagiarism, those are obviously some downfalls. Jono, please go.
I think content SEO or content in general is often undervalued because everybody finds it very easy to have an opinion on it versus the technical stuff, which is quite often a bit more obscure, which means that everybody will invest just enough to get to 4 out of 10 quality content, but they struggle to often understand the difference between 10 out of 10, which is that real understanding of the audience and the problem you're trying to solve. And yeah, anybody can write 200 words about a thing on a page, but it's not going to convince and compel people. That's a craft. And it's just as difficult, I think, as technical and as hard to scale as well. I think the challenge of scale is an interesting one of big sites. That, yeah, you fix one tiny thing on a huge site and you fixed 1 million pages, whereas maybe adding one more page to that isn't going to change the world. So yeah, for startups and small businesses, definitely content first on as good a platform as you can get, but it doesn't make sense to overinvest in technical at day one. It hurts me to say that.
So I have a question based on something that you mentioned in the presentation. So I've been fortunate to have some clients who have an excellent content team, and they write good stuff. They are asking the right question. They think about what their target audience would like, and they write good blog posts. But the main thing that I'm always teaching is this unholy 1 page per topic concept, right? And I always tell them, for SEO, you're better off producing evergreen content. Make sure that your pages are clearly distinct. Make sure they don't cover the same keywords. And I'm curious to see, where do the three of you sit on this? And I don't know, Jono, if you want to kick it off, because you mentioned this in the presentation. Sure. But I always feel like I'm kind of like the party pooper. Like, people are writing great content, and then I'm like, yeah, but only 1 page per topic.
Yeah, it makes me deeply uncomfortable in ways that I sometimes struggle to articulate. I think it's a dysfunction of the way that Google works that they've imposed on us. And it forces the web into a certain shape, where a page has to be about a thing. And how big that thing is might vary. It might be a keyword, it might be 10, it might be some loosely clustered topics. But it forces this shape that I'm not sure is the web that we would have built and had Google not enforced that. And the reason we struggle to get content writers and bloggers to think in that way is because it is a bit alien and artificial. And this idea that you have to have the perfect page with the perfect answer for one topic through all of time is not necessarily the way you would go about trying to convince and compel and prove that you have a good brand and a good fit. And that does, as much as I really want to say these disciplines and these approaches should never really have conflict, this is a weird thing. And I'm not in love with it, but it's what we're stuck with. And I don't think it will change. I think this is so baked into the very heart of how Google works, that a page has a URL is about a topic, that this is the world as we have it. And the other thing that I think comes out of this is that it doesn't really matter to Google who has that best page or who wins. They only care that there is a best page for each answer. And that distorts the web further, which I'm not sure is necessarily a good thing. But hey, who are we to complain?
I don't know if you guys want to add to this. If not, I'll have a question from the comments that I'm curious to see you guys kind of like fight about. how do we feel about word count? What are kind of the thinking and considerations that you guys? What do you think about, Rebecca, when you think about word count? What makes you make that decision? I'm going to let you go first, and then I want to see what the guys are thinking when it comes to word count as well.
I never use word count ever. The way I do my content is I go out and I try and figure out what questions people are asking and around a certain topic, and then the ones that I think are the most important I'll answer. Sometimes I'll write a piece of content that's 300 words, sometimes it'll be over 1,000. If it starts to get quite long, I may think of maybe breaking it up a bit more into a couple more pieces just so that people don't get bored. It is really hard to keep people's attention, especially with long form content. The only time I would say I do think of word count, I guess, is when I'm writing to optimize for featured snippets, because I know there is a sort of sweet spot to get it to display. But when it comes to whole pages, I don't even think about word count, to be honest.
Brad, what do you think?
Okay, 6.
Yeah. So I was going to say that whenever we create content requirement for websites, something that we then send to our content writers, we usually put a range of, from around that long to around that long. Let's say I need a piece of content about X, that is, let's say, between 1.5K to 2.5K words long, right? And so the reason for that is because we basically look at competitors and take like the averages usually, right? Because I'm a firm believer that if Google ranked something on the first page, and the more common little factors you get out of all of these results, the better you have the chance to actually rank among them, right? And but to be honest with you, I've never gone and said to the content writer, hey, your content is too long, right? Just shorten it down or something, right? Because unless it was like 3 times longer than I needed it, and I had the limited space to put it. So, but other than that, it wasn't like that. And to be honest with you, I've seen cases where you write longer content and you rank better. I've seen the opposite cases where we had like 10,000 words of long buying guide or something, and we narrow it down, made it a lot more concise, and then I think we cut it down to like 2,000 words or something like that, so around 80% shorter, and it's gone up, right? And that was also the observation that we took, just looking at what's currently ranking on the first page.
See, this is where I love when content marketers work with tech guys, because when I write, I think a lot about how I see the web. So I call myself a lazy looker, which is why I tend to use headers in my writing a lot, because when I'm searching for myself, even though I'm a writer, I don't read loads and loads of content. I just look at the headers. But if you came to me and said, hey, Rebecca, that content that you wrote is great. Did you know that the first page of the SERPs, everyone's content is this long? Maybe that might make a difference. And I can say, oh, okay, let's try that, and it might make a fantastic big difference. It might not, it might do, and that's why it's so important that we all work together.
I always say this thing. I think long content is a good way to add the keyword more often in a non-spammy way. That being said, I'm very much out of the school of thought that also read is where I very much look on page 1, but I think looking on page 1 tells us just what does Google think is, the right answer for that search intent and that search query. So I usually add a comment where I say something like, this is a long form, in-depth, top of the funnel guide that covers the basics. So basically, and then we have the classic what is, examples, best practices, long form article, while some other stuff might be significantly shorter. We have some people asking questions here, and I think that's a classic SEO issue as well. That's kind of like on the borderline between content and technical, which is how do you deal with e-commerce with the different sizes and types, and how do you combat duplicating content all over the place? I don't know who wants to jump in first, but what are kind of a few things that you want to mention about e-commerce SEO and the technical and content intricacies of that?
Brad, this feels like your ball.
No, I'm just smiling because this question pops up so often with e-commerce. Frankly, this, by the way, might not be a very popular opinion, but frankly, I think that Google is actually a bit more lenient when it comes to stuff like duplicate content, especially on product pages on e-commerce sites, right? At least that's what I've been noticing time and time again over all these years. Because if you think about it, like a lot of players, even medium-sized players who don't have enough resources to, hire 20 content writers to rework like 10,000 product descriptions, are what they're doing. Usually they're just taking the content from the manufacturers, right, and sticking that content on the product pages, right? And I think this overall could be, the thing is, it's okay. Obviously, it would be better if the content was unique, right? But I don't think Google is paying that much attention to that in particular, right? Because on the e-commerce side, I think SEOing products and optimizing just product pages isn't the best strategy for that, right? If you're going for a very long tail keywords like that involve product names and stuff like that, usually those keywords have a much lower competition, and obviously you can get away with some mistakes on the product pages, right? What you really want to do is focus on the category pages, because usually they have a higher search volume potential and higher traffic potential than the product pages, right? But also, having said that, going back to what I've said earlier about scaling on the e-commerce site, Jono, products, if you optimize product page, if you add like 1-2 unique sentences, if you extract, let's say, if you extract some technical data and put it on the product pages, this is already making your content more unique and better, right? Because what you're after, you're basically after added value, right? So, add that tiny value. Don't worry about, copied product descriptions from the manufacturers, unless the product descriptions like that long, then I would probably just cut them out completely and try to get like tables with technical data. But if this is just like a few sentences or something, or like a paragraph or two, I wouldn't worry about that. I would basically focus on something that I can extract from the data, from the product specifications or stuff like that, and then try to add that as the added value to those duplicated descriptions, right? And other than that, focus on the category pages.
Jono, do you want to add something to the e-commerce debate?
Sure. I think it's the same flavor of answer that I'd give for the how long should your content be, which is it depends. But I think we're still stuck in this world where one page should be one topic which solves one problem, and product pages are a specific type of problem. And in many cases, it's a race to the bottom on price and on availability. But when it's not, and when you have the opportunity to compete on preference and on brand and on creating a resource, then it's not radically different from any other page. You create as much content as you need to turn that page into the best possible resource. Where the additional challenge comes in from e-commerce is you've also got to sell a product on that page, which is what Rebecca was saying about the importance of headings and structure, but within a whole additional layer that you're now having to balance that against the product stuff itself. There is no reason why a great product page couldn't have 5,000 words of well-structured, wonderfully helpful content that answers every question I might have, that supports me, that has post-sales, that tells me the nuances of every different color, etc. That can be done. It's just much, much harder than to do 50 words of a description and a feature table. So nobody does. And this was the other point I wanted to think about, was that you need to be really careful when you're looking at what everybody else in the search results doing, because they're all people like you looking at what people like you are doing in the search results, and none of them have budget. They all have a broken website, and none of them can convince their stakeholders to put more than than 50 words on their category pages. Like, you've got to be really careful. You can win by breaking out of that, but it's much harder than just a page of content.
I wanted to ask a different question before, but this is exactly what I'm so curious about, is like, where's our creativity in all of this? Like, with all these kind of like rules about content writing and looking on page one, etc. Like, are we all becoming so similar? Are we all creating the same website out of the same toolbox with the same keyword in the page title and the same 5 subheadlines that everyone on page one is using? Like, how do we stay creative and unique in this game where everyone is using the same tools, the same content, AIs, etc.? How do we set ourselves apart?
And then we wonder and complain why Google extracts all of our content and just shows it in the SERP because it's utterly generic. Yeah, it's a really good question. I wonder how much of the answer is just brand, but that's ephemeral.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we need to move away from this fear of failing as well. A lot of the time, people will only invest in something that they know is going to work. But if you try at some point, someone will try something different, and it will completely flip the script. It's just whether you're brave enough to do that, and whether, I suppose, you do have that sort of budget in the background to pick you up if you do something a bit different.
Marketing.
Yeah, like
exactly.
Marketing.
Yeah. Exactly. And since this question came up, kind of in relation to the previous one about the e-commerce, I'm completely in agreement with you, Jono, that it doesn't mean what I've said. It doesn't mean that you can't have like a lot of beautifully crafted, unique content that you've written. But again, like we've just said, it's all broken down to the budget and the stakeholders asking, oh, is that gonna work? Show me someone who's already doing this, which I've heard so many times actually in my career, right? And being brave is, if it pays back, if it pays off, then you're the hero. But if it doesn't work, then you're probably lost in this game, right?
Yeah. And if you just do it once, you do it badly, it's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I can tell you what is kind of like the framework that I try with my clients. Like, what I tell them is always, when I give them the content briefing and I give them, this one topic per page, etc., I always tell them, this is kind of like the framework, it's the skeleton. You still have the chance to add tone of voice and color and nuance to this. But I definitely think there's a trend to kind of like standardizing also in terms of like layouts, design, etc., which we'll actually cover in the next webinar. So I'll revert back to a technical question. Something that's also come up in the chat now, and something that I've been wondering, you had the chart, Jono, with all the bubbles. And then you said there's a meaty part in the middle, and then there's an arrow pointing at the meaty part. And then basically you have the question later, and you say, okay, there's probably the meaty part somehow involves structured data and in a mix with editorial content. So I just wanted to ask each one of you, maybe for a tip that you use in terms of structured data, or what do you commonly implement, and what is the one thing from your practice that people can take away and start implementing for their websites? If not, maybe you guys need to have someone teach you. But
I'll go unless you guys go first. I've talked a lot.
I feel like I've missed the question. Sorry.
Sorry. What if we believe that some of the meaty stuff on the intersection of content and technical today is structured data? What's your handle on this? What do you do? What do you implement? What is a must-do on every website?
Ooh. I mean, I think there's the obvious. If you've got a product page, put product schema on. If you've got an article schema, organization schema. I feel like schema structured data is just translating what's on the page into a language that Google understands. So obviously, without completely ruining your page speed, the more the better in my book.
Hell yeah.
I would definitely add FAQ schema, because that comes up pretty much everywhere. Whether you have like products page content, you can stick it out there, or articles or anything else really. And that it actually looks cool in Google search results currently.
I would definitely have to say use Yoast, seeing as I wrote most of our schema spec and we output a ton of stuff automatically and it's beautiful. But on top of that, whilst I'm on the WordPress bandwagon, use the Gutenberg editor. If you're on WordPress, if you're not, bad luck, but if you are, really take advantage of the new block editor to, and I've written about this, but I think we need to stop writing pages and start producing resources. And that's a different frame of mind. And that covers, let's not just write the words, but design the layout and think this bit should be 2 columns. Here we need an image break. This bit should be in a side. This bit should only pop out when you click on it. And behind all of that, here's an FAQ with structured data. This bit's a how-to. This bit's a recipe. And you really, really have to craft. And that takes 100 times the work that it does to make a page, but it pays 100 times back because nobody is doing this. Because again, every CEO says, show me somebody else is doing this. And of course, none of them are doing it because they're not brave enough and you get stuck in that circle. So yeah, stop thinking about making pages and start thinking about crafting resources. They rank, they get links, they sell stuff, they convince consumers. This is how we win.
I love it.
They get the attention, so your time on page is longer. And obviously the information structure is better as well. So yeah.
I will add to that. I've probably in the last year or two, I've been on a roll talking with my clients about the WordPress category pages. And I like that you're saying like resources, because what I've been telling people is like WordPress category pages are a weird beast. Like obviously they're nice in terms they're already there. They're easy to use. They provide good internal linking. If you choose your categories smartly, you can get a lot of like contextually related articles interlinked very easily. So I like a lot of the functionality, but I just don't think it's logical they're sorted by date.
Oh, God,
and
no.
what I always tell people is like, think about your category page as a resource library. And what does the library do? They structure content based in topics. So yeah, I've been on a run, like whether you call them hub pages or pillar pages or whatever you want to call them, but I've been on a mission like redesigning all the WordPress category pages with my clients into resource libraries where the topics, fruit is then broken down into apple, oranges, and bananas, and then you can go deeper and learn about everything that is to learn about apples in that section. So, love it. Yeah, I assume that some of the meaty stuff, juicy stuff that Jono wants us to do in that intersection of kind of like technical implementation and content. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything to add on category pages, but I can already warn you that I want to talk about internal links next.
I absolutely adore hub pages. I think they're great. I think a lot of people miss a beat when they stop creating resources for people once they've bought something, because you're missing out such an opportunity for them to come back and buy again, because you're giving them all this free information. If they've bought a washing machine, what happens if it leaks for that particular model? What happens if there's a weird smell coming from it? People are going to Google that. And if you're not giving them that response, but someone else's, when they need to buy a new one or upgrade to a part, they'll go to that person. There's just hub pages offer so much more opportunity than just standalone pieces of content.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, a lot of, I actually don't know about Gutenberg, but I mean, some of the other builders like Elementor, Thrive Themes, etc., now make it like super easy to make like nice blog category pages. So I definitely recommend you to play with this. So then, could you share some examples of websites you think have perfect hub pages? I can pop some links in the chat and we can somehow see how we can move them to you. But what I wanted to ask next is what I assume also lives on the intersection between content and technical is internal links. And again, I wanted to ask you, what are some best practices that you can share for the people in the audience? How should they think about internal links? What are kind of your secret hacks and things that we should be doing?
I would say don't no-follow your internal links. It's a pet peeve of mine. Don't do it.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
Don't stick UTM parameters on them either whilst we're at it.
Yeah. Or Facebook tracking codes.
Yeah, keep it clean and simple and try and envision the journey that you want your user to go on and use your internal linking for that. Definitely more for the user rather than for SEO, I would say, because if you follow the journey that the user wants, then Google's going to do that too, and it's going to make more sense to everyone.
I would say definitely place internal links where it makes sense, not where you have to like really look for that link, right? Especially if you're the main content writer for the website, it's easy for you to, write a new piece of content and you're like, oh, I've actually mentioned that, some time ago. I'll just link to it, right? Or, oh, I've seen this resource on the website already. I'll just link to it, right? And obviously, it makes perfect sense, right? From the SEO perspective, obviously we do care about the old stuff like PageRank and things like that, and contextual relevance. So contextual relevance is easy. PageRank is slightly more difficult, but since you're creating a completely new piece of content, you don't really have PageRank on it, so you can go back after how many links it got. After some time, you can go back and maybe think of adding more or removing some internal links to strengthen the pages that you want to link out from that resource page, right? But overall, just link where it makes sense. And maybe last thing that I kind of pay attention to, or at least try to, when I'm building a topical silo on the website, I tend to try, which isn't always possible or feasible, but I tend to try to link within the silo internally, right? Obviously, if it makes sense to link outside of the silo to some other resource, then obviously it's kind of natural. But just to preserve that topical relevance, I try to link within the silo.
Jonah, oh yeah, Rebecca, please.
Just going back to what Brad said about linking where it's sensible, I think as well, not to be afraid to create a piece of content that doesn't have an internal links, as if it's strong enough to stand alone. I feel like you have to sort of say, oh, but I linked here, which makes it a relevant piece of content. Whereas if it stands alone, it stands alone. And if you try and force it, then people can just tell what you're doing.
Yeah, like obviously artificial internal linking is really rubbish. I think if you are doing a good job of kind of following that one page, one topic rule, you will naturally have related pages, and you will naturally want to reference, oh, here's this sibling of this page, or here's this more general parent, and that will happen very naturally, and you'll find that you're referencing those topics. But yeah, if you ever find that you're kind of doing it artificially, something has gone horribly wrong. In terms of hacks, I'd be remiss not to mention, if anyone didn't see it, Mike King's MozCon talk from a couple of weeks ago referenced a tactic that I first saw in 2011, where you dynamically update your internal links based on your rankings. This was called second page poaching. It requires a bit of work setup, and I'm not convinced it's worth the effort, but it's fascinating as an idea. You monitor your rankings for when things slip from page 1 onto page 2, and then you automatically update all your internal links and their anchor text to pull those back up. And the theory is you get a little bit of a network effect. So there's a whole fascinating school of thought around that sort of manipulation. Again, I don't necessarily recommend it, but there are people playing with that sort of thing to some success.
So that is definitely the engineer speaking.
Yeah, how do we fix this automatically without having to care about human users?
Absolutely.
I've actually tested that a lot of times, and it works, but it's not really sustainable, because if you change internal links and you need to link something else, then you remove those, and you'll end up having things just falling off the first page all of a sudden, right? There's probably something more, something broken on the site or with the content or something that you can fix easier than just, with, abusing PageRank.
Nice. I'll add my last kind of like bit of thought on this is, when we publish new articles, we usually always link to old articles. But we often forget that we can link from old articles to new articles as well. So definitely just wanted to put that on your radar again, that you can also go through your old articles and link back to the new ones. So we have 59 seconds left. I'm actually not sure if Kate is going to kill us like right to the minute, but everyone just quickly yell their website where people can find you. You have about 15 seconds each.
Jellybeanagency.co.uk.
Well done.
Thank you.
susodigital.com, and definitely have a look at susodigital.com/textbook, because that's a really cool free SEO course.
Nice. Yoast.com, which will solve all of your technical and content problems. JohnMalderson.com for me in particular, and at JohnMalderson on Twitter.
All right. You can find me best on LinkedIn or not at flowseo.com. It has been a pleasure with you guys. Make sure to stay tuned. We have a new one coming up on the 8th of September. We have Bastian Grimm coming, so that's going to be a party as well. And we're looking forward to having you.
Bastian is one of the best.
He is. He is a really good dude.
All
right.
Great one.
All right. I think we successfully made it to 1 hour and 7 seconds. We didn't get cut off. So
now let's carry on.
I need more coffee, so we're going to carry on.
Well, no, I really wanted to say thank you. I appreciate that you guys came on the show today. I love having these like panels and more conversational webinars. I think super interesting. So thank you to my 3 panelists. Thank you for everyone who posted a comment, and we're excited to have you back.
Thanks a lot.
Good work. Thank you very much. That was lovely. See you later.